I'm Chandler Ostrike.
Courtney Muncie.
Phoebe Stanford. And today we are going to give a presentation over the marijuana policies in Texas, or lack thereof. Two of us work in Child Protective Services and have seen quite the gap in relationship between the families and use of marijuana, and investigators in Child Protective Services and even supervisors. Phoebe also works in child welfare realm, and so we see a lot of this in the issue that comes up, and there's just a lot of gray area. So we wanted to try to pinpoint as much as we can, just to kind of divide between the black and white of marijuana policies in Texas. This packet was given to me and Courtney at our internship by our supervisor at the beginning of the semester, because as of January 1st of 2018, our supervisor was laying down the law and saying this is in effect. This is essentially the guidebook to how to handle marijuana cases, because there's no set policy, no definite thing to follow. These were just some very thought-provoking suggestions. She also included in this packet for us some danger indicators to consider, and danger indicators are essentially factors that each investigator needs to take into consideration when they're dealing with a family that could potentially involve drug use. So some danger indicators include young parents, parents that were in care as a child, and that's in care of the state, meaning we're CPS children. Parents abused or neglected as children, parents who have a history of using illegal substances, the first child never parented in the past, using illegal substances, even alcohol use is a danger indicator to look into this. Marijuana during pregnancy. Children positive at birth is a huge danger indicator. If they have previous CPS history, criminal history, violence, special medical needs, and previous removal in the home. These are all factors we take into consideration when looking at a case that involves marijuana. So this packet has kind of been our guidebook into determining what step to take next when coming across families that use marijuana. Okay, so a little bit of the background. Because marijuana legalization is an ever-changing issue, it seems like, in the United States. Legalization of marijuana is becoming more prevalent, obviously in states like Washington, California, Colorado, and that raises a lot of questions for states where it isn't legal, and how Child Protective Services in various states are going to deal with this problem. So for instance, in Region 7, that includes the Central Texas area. Texas is divided into several different regions for CPS to be kind of in control of. Central Texas is Region 7, that goes down to Austin, and as north is Hillsboro. But this past year, they investigated around 15 child fatalities that have two common factors. That includes marijuana use by the caregivers and young nonverbal children. What defines a young nonverbal child is typically 3 and under. This is a little bit more of a give and take, but the standard is about 3 and under. So with children that are 3 and under, they are typically more vulnerable. One, because they can't verbalize their needs, and two, at that point in age, sometimes they don't know exactly what their needs are. This is where the danger comes in, because a parent that is under the influence of marijuana, their mind is being altered in a way that potentially they can't take care of their child completely sober. So because they're more vulnerable and their ability is not as strong to take care of their child, an example of that would be, let's say a 5-year-old is left at home while the parents go out front to go smoke marijuana, and the child is left inside home alone, and something happens to them. The parent is not there and aware of what's happening to them. This is a huge danger to the child, but even if you can imagine even younger children that potentially couldn't run outside and scream to mom and dad for help if something was going wrong. It also just affects their ability in what's happening while the parents aren't present and something else is going on in their mind. Are they leaving their kids home alone? Is neglect happening? Did parents decide to go smoke instead of feed their child dinner? Are their kids getting properly bathed? Things like that are really big concerns for Child Protective Services. So another thing that we found in a little bit of research we did was that there's a positive association between marijuana use and frequency of child physical abuse. This has been proven in several different research studies, but it's also been hard to track just for the nature of CPS studies and how we drug test and things along those lines. So a little bit more about the history of this policy that we'll talk about. So 15 years ago, marijuana involved cases were an instant removal. This is according to my supervisor, who has been at Child Protective Services for 25 years now. She said any marijuana was suspected, if they were drug tested on the spot, instant removal. That's how serious it was. Somewhere along the lines, I guess between people starting to use it for medical purposes and legalization in various states, it became a lot less strict. And somehow it's the less of the evils. A lot more parents we're finding are turning to meth, which is obviously a lot more mind altering. A lot more incidents of abuse and neglect are happening involving meth, and that's now the instant removal standard. So when marijuana was first legalized in 2012 in Colorado and Washington, I was asking my supervisor about this, and she said that no, between now and then she has not seen an increase in cases involving marijuana, but that's also caused a lot of investigators to slacken the area of looking for it. Other drugs, like I said, such as meth, are becoming more commonly used among parents. But that's not to say that marijuana isn't severe. It's still a drug, and it still needs to be inspected because it is altering the minds of parents. So that's just a little bit of the background.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some of the risks of using marijuana around children. So it is known that caretakers can become more aggressive while using marijuana, and this can lead to abuse or neglect or anything like that. Also, using during pregnancy can lead to a child's behavioral issues later on. Something that I study a lot about in my internship is trauma, and how even that trauma before they are born, using during pregnancy, can really cause mind-altering effects in a child. It can also lead to premature births and withdrawal symptoms. A baby going through withdrawal is 10 times worse than an adult going through withdrawal, and the hardness that goes, like their body goes through, can be really dangerous. Homes that have marijuana present and those children that are around that marijuana have a higher risk of being sexually or physically abused or neglected, simply because their parents are, like Chandler said, their minds are altered and they're not thinking about their child's needs as much as they're thinking about relaxing and getting high. Children that are exposed at young ages are more likely to be involved in drugs and part of the criminal justice system. If you know about drugs, if you know how to use drugs, if you know where to get drugs, then it's much easier for a child to do that later on in life and take that path instead of one that has not experienced drug use at all. Children can suffer from poor hygiene, kind of like Chandler said too. The parents aren't thinking about bathing their child properly. They're not thinking about their physical needs, or they can miss school because the parents aren't there to take them to school. They're not there to get them to the bus, and they're not old enough to do it themselves. So all of these are some risks that surround marijuana being used in the home and how they can affect children and their relationship with their parents and their relationship with other people, because they haven't learned how to socialize and they haven't done all of that kind of stuff because of the neglect. Okay, so an overview of the policy we looked at. This policy looks at the rules and regulations around marijuana use in child welfare cases. So many times when marijuana is present, CPS workers will kind of dismiss it, and because it's not as important as actual physical abuse or emotional abuse or anything like that, if it's the only thing that's happening, they're gonna just close the case normally. So the main focus of this policy is that parents and caregivers work to keep their actions in check, and it was created to heighten awareness of CPS investigators to not overlook marijuana use within families. So this is something that a lot of different CPS offices in different states and counties disagree on. It's just, like Chandler said, the less of all evils, but it needs to be looked at more seriously because the ramifications can be so great if something were to happen with a child and marijuana is in the home. If marijuana is mentioned or there is suspected use due to a parent's behavior, drug testing is necessary. And a positive drug test result means heightened awareness of all other factors and continuous random drug testing until consistently testing clean. So these are things in this policy that are stated, but not every state or every county follows this. And so that's what we're talking about today, is we want this to be a set in stone thing, that when marijuana comes up in a case, that it's looked at more seriously, and that investigators are drug testing parents until they are consistently clean, so that we don't leave these babies in homes that they're surrounded by drugs all day long.
And looking at the rules of the policy, all supervisors should utilize the safety decision model when staffing to ensure that all danger indicators are recognized and discussed. And just an overview of staffing is sitting down with the caseworker and their supervisor in order to talk over the case and get a full view of everything that's happening. Danger indicators include previous CPS cases, history of drug use, or a history of babies being born into the family that are testing positive for drugs at birth. And by catching all of these danger indicators, it is easier to close a case successfully and know that the family is safe in providing protective care to the children. And also in working to close a case, caseworkers must staff the cases that started with a newborn testing positive at birth in order to ensure the child's safety with both their supervisor and their PD, which is their program director. This policy also ensures that all cases are run by more than one individual, which allows more than one set of eyes to assess the danger indicators and allows decisions to take place, which is just an extra checklist of things to go through to ensure safety of the children. So looking at the analysis of this specific policy, the new policy states that caseworkers and supervisors will temporarily utilize staffings, but in looking at this, we believe that investigators and supervisors should always be using these staffings in order to get a broader view on these cases, in order to get more than one view, just so there's no bias going into the case. And by working with the supervisor and program director to determine the case outcome. So this needs to be an ongoing process, and getting additional feedback is always useful in cases. We also have recognized that a majority of families who have a case dealing with marijuana have had an open investigation within the last year due to other factors, which looks back at our combination of danger indicators in our previous slide. And in working to catch these and look into these, we can ensure that the family is going to keep their children safe in the end. We also do believe that there should be a more defined policy about drug testing. In certain cases, the families can be drug tested because of suspected use, and then in other cases, there's also suspected use, but they don't get drug tested. And this is just where the lines between the counties become blurry. It's easier to have a more defined policy about drug testing so that families are more willing to cooperate with the department and are more willing to work with their caseworker. In working with marijuana cases this semester, I was able to work through a courtesy case in which the case was transferred to McLennan County from another county, and the other county deemed that the case was closed. The case was ready to be closed after a few interviews that needed to happen in the city of Waco. And after doing the interviews in Waco, I determined that it was not ready to be closed due to marijuana use. And when sending that back to the other county, they determined that marijuana use was not a danger indicator in this case and that it should be closed. So they went ahead and closed it while knowing that marijuana use was still happening in the home. And so through this experience, we believe that all Texas counties should be on the same page concerning the fact that marijuana is a danger indicator and that they should look at it in the same way.
Yeah, okay, so another recommendation that we have is when a mother tests positive at birth, when the baby tests positive at birth, there should be a set plan in place that this is what we do when these positive tests are happening, and this is what we do with every single case in every single county, so that there's not this discretion between counties and people don't feel like they need to follow things as seriously. This is a serious matter, and we really think that there should be a 100% set in stone plan for what happens when those positive tests occur. Another recommendation we have is that there be more serious staffings around marijuana use. So Courtney went into what staffings are, but we really think that every single marijuana case should be staffed with a program director before closing the case. Just keeping everyone in the know whether the case gets closed or not is something that's super imperative, because it's highly likely that that case could be opened again when there's marijuana in the home and those kids are being subject to that potential neglect and potential getting into the drugs themselves.
Yeah, and so another thing that I kind of touched on a little bit at the beginning was age of the child involved in this case shouldn't matter, whether they are 6 months old, 3 years old, even 10 years old. As we keep saying, it's still a serious matter and their parents still aren't fully present as they should be. So in whatever policy needs to happen that's a lot more strict around this, it needs to be consistent on age as well. That packet that I introduced in the beginning is pretty much about heightened awareness for ages 3 and under, but we believe that because of what it does to parents and what's happening to children involved with parents that are involved in marijuana, it really just needs to be a lot more standardized regardless of the child's age. A 10-year-old may be a lot more self-sufficient, but they're still 10 years old and they still need guidance from their parents, clear and sober guidance. So those are just a few recommendations we have. This is an ever-changing issue, obviously, in the United States because of the legalization continually happening, more people getting prescribed for medical use of marijuana, and that's always looked at very differently state to state as well. So this is just our rough idea of what should be into place, but we do agree that all counties in the state of Texas do need to be on the same page, because that's a very frustrating issue that a lot of different counties are facing when one's taking it more serious than the other. So, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.